I mean, I don't know if anyone on her parents do this, but she makes whole comment off the should be lawyers and me and my brother especially, because we both super strong-headed and like activists in the most opposite ways. And it's so strange because we grew up exactly the same way. It's not like we were. It's strange. So when we argue about constitutional clauses and separation of church and state is favorite. We argue about the Second Amendment, and I think, and he's always wanted to take things very literally. And then in this issue, he very much flip-flops, and then I take it very literally. And it's in actual phrasing. I mean, I'm not like expert at constitution here that I can pull every word, but it's really, I take it as more if the citizens want a militia in case of a government, because we were so sensitive about the revolution and being independent that we were kind of just paranoid and like, we have the right to create militias and armies just in case our government kind of turns on us. But I think, that's just kind of my interpretation of like, it's not really it's meant to use against other citizens, it's really just as a defense, in case of revolution. But I think in this day and age, even a semi-automatic gun is not going to protect you from nuke. And our military is, for lack of a better term, ridiculous in its weaponry. So I don't see how that's relevant anymore.
Yeah, I've been engaging this debate a lot from the liberal point of view, and I was recently talking to someone, and they brought up the example of the Black Panther Party, which sort of shed some new light on this issue, where the Black Panther Party was protesting and making themselves visible in extremely dangerous neighborhoods and very dangerous climates. And the people who could license them guns and sell them guns were precisely the people who were trying to oppress them, and the people who were trying to withhold civil rights from them. And I feel like it's one modern example wherein this sort of revolutionary militia ideal actually made sense in a modern context, and that the Black Panther Party used to march with guns. And I don't know any statistics as far as if the Black Panther Party was ever really associated with murder or unnecessary homicides, but I do know that they had a direct threat from white people who predominantly lived in these neighborhoods and white people who ran the law enforcement, the military, and the government in these areas, and it made sense for the Black Panther Party to be able to protect themselves in that way. But I'm not sure if that issue really will ever come up again in American history. Now that, legally civil rights have been won for non-white people, I wonder what other oppressed group would ever need to defend themselves against the military or against a military majority. So I feel like it is a bit of a complex issue, but that sheds some light on it.
I'd like to answer Dylan's question personally, but also I want to add, and I'm not sure if this is from John Rosenthal or more fully for Caroline, but somewhere this week I did learn that the Second Amendment was literally reinterpreted by the Supreme Court at one point, so that it now, although it was written for militia originally, there was a point in U.S. history where it was said, and individuals legally preferred. So there is some basis there. But then going back to the original question, so I mentioned earlier my uncle who would be a moderate gun user, and I had conversations before where I had known him or someone say to me, I don't want people to take my gun away. So I had called out and said, well, I don't think anyone's really ever proposed that, at least officially, legislatively, even if people do something to agree with that. And I don't know. I think when having those conversations, it's always obviously if it's something someone enjoys and is passionate about, they'll defend it. And I have total respect for that. But once that part of the conversation is kind of taken care of, and then I'm able to then bring up, that's not what liberals on this issue want to do. This is what liberals want to do. Then they do agree. So, if this argument of we're trying to take guns away is created by the NRA, then it's brilliant because it really does. The people. We keep saying that the 90% of Americans that support universal background checks are mobilized, and the 10% of Americans that don't are, and they are because there's fear being used by the NRA, and I've seen it in my family of people who will say like, no, I don't want my guns taken away, but then, if you do kind of have conversations and talk, I think we really do see more eye to eye than that statement says.
Just to step in real quick, we do have a few more minutes of open dialogue. If anyone who maybe hasn't commented or has a few more questions that they want to ask, just feel that.
We've been talking a lot about constitutionality and the validity of the Second Amendment, and I want to bring up the point that my dad knows I'm a hothead and more liberal than he is, so he'll purposely argue with me just to strengthen my arguments. And he brought up a point that if we start saying that one part of the Constitution is invalid, what would that do to the rest of the Constitution? What would that do to all the other amendments, all the other articles? Like, can we argue that those are invalid as well? What do you think about that?
I was just going to say, I don't think that's ever. I think people are so quick to defend that argument, and I understand that, but I don't think it's a gateway in let's revamp everything. I think we have seen parts of the Constitution that have proposed threats to the basic human rights of people or humans in general in their lives. And the only two instances I can find where people were doubting or questioning the Constitution are the right to bear arms and also the freedom of religion, where the KKK came in and everyone was questioning whether, yes, it is a freedom to mobilize and they're white Anglo-Saxon faith, but it's threatening people and it's killing people. So if you look historically at history, people aren't always like, yeah, I want to change every single part of the Constitution. It's more so like, let's look at areas of the Constitution that because times have changed, they have affected human beings in such a negative way.
Okay, I want to piggyback on what Dylan said. I'm in a ethics and justice class right now, and we're talking about some of the inspiration to the founding of our government, which is Thomas Hobbes. So in modernity, there's the whole construct of the social contract, and that we each agree to the social contract so that our basic human rights aren't taken away from us. And one of those is life. I mean, that's the most basic right that we have, at least I believe. And I think that when issues like this come up, it's because of something. One of our basic needs there's something troubling one of our basic needs. And in this time, it's the issue of guns. And guns are an issue to our basic need of life. And so we need to respond to that. And we can adapt the Constitution to our social contract to help that.
Talking constitutionally, when we do that by, let's say, by Congress passing a law banning automatic assault weapons, let's say that makes it up to the Supreme Court, someone challenges it, takes it to the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court says, yep, you can do this, then this is an argument made that is valid, that in that way a slippery slope effect would happen where Congress could keep passing more and more restrictive laws until one day you'll get no more handguns. And there will be precedent saying that, well, we ban this, we can ban this too. You know what I'm saying? So that's something that people out there do fear, and it's a valid fear. Because we're seeing like the massive effects that the Supreme Court cases have now in the past couple of days with gay marriage. But it could easily go south for the Supreme Court Second Amendment.
I understand that slippery slope argument, especially when it comes in with notions of tyranny that may influence the government. But I think that because of the culture of fear, perhaps manufactured by the NRA, people are very quick to say that the Constitution can't be sort of changed or regulated or limited, but what people don't realize is that the Constitution is always being limited and augmented in different ways. Like look at the First Amendment, which is the amendment that people I think hold most dear in America. People view that as the most basic fundamental right, but there are limits on free speech. You're not allowed to threaten people. You're not allowed to promote hate speech wherein someone has been murdered by that hate speech. If someone has been murdered by neo-Nazis in a community, you're not allowed to bring neo-Nazi protests to that community because it relates to a direct physical threat. And I think that that law makes sense. I think that a threat should be illegal because it anticipates a physical harm that people shouldn't have to live in fear of. And I think gun legislation is the exact same thing. I think people shouldn't have to live their days bringing their kids to school afraid of semi-automatic weapons and afraid of unfit people having access to guns. I think that whenever we augment or put limits on constitutional rights, we do it within a dialogue of what we as a society agree is fair within First Amendments. I'm not exactly sure when the First Amendment was limited, when the ideas of threat and hate speech were added to the First Amendment, but I would say that the First Amendment right to free speech is still alive and well in America, and it's still defended by artists and politicians and lawyers alike.
Yeah, I think bigger picture. If your dad's argument was, so let's say we put a new amendment that contradicts the announcement you do not have the right to bear arms. I don't think that would immediately everyone would be like, hey, well, let's just look at all of them. And then we've seen that in the past. So I think the 18th Amendment made alcohol legal. Then the 21st Amendment made it legal again. And then right when that happened, people didn't go, let's look at all of these things and figure out what else we can change. Because it would take a huge effort for
Also takes a
that
long time.
if it ever actually happened, let's say 300 years from now, America's still around, that part of the Constitution is still there. We're at some level of society where weapons are so dangerous that we can't have them, and they repeal it. That would be a huge process. So I think it's a hard argument to make to say, well, then there'd be a snowball effect because it would be an equally hard thing to change the next amendment they want to change. You know what I mean? So I think it would take so much support to actually see a constitutional amendment about this issue at that level that would revoke that right. That I don't think a snowball effect would be possible.
Any last question?
I did have one more question, and this was kind of going back to what we were talking about masculinity, because you said you had to let go when you mentioned the word masculinity, but you didn't really. I was wondering if you care to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, they're kind of reactions. I think it's
Yeah. Okay. And then maybe you as
I
well.
think it was more like anything outside of anything outside of personal experience, I'm very generalizing. But I think in terms of what I've seen with my brother and how he kind of thinks, when he comes home with that rifle, it's not like he keeps it in his closet in his room or he will leave it on the couch on purpose and have it up and not even on 6 feet or anything like that. And it will be when he has his friends over, they'll shoot parties in the backyard. He kind of in a flaunting kind of way, and that was always or feels like he has a right to have it. It's not. It was weird that he had one because I couldn't see a reason why, but the way he would kind of act about it, and every time I would bring it up, he would kind of instead of defending his constitution, that wasn't even his first argument was he had the right to do it. He was more like.
But he brought it to masculinity.
He did. He didn't directly be he's killing a man. He was feeling that out loud. But it's all in how it made him feel having done. And I think the stereotype of gang violence and seeing a particular looking up to people that have guns and that how it is a power thing too. I think it's not so much masculinity, like we can argue gender, but like I think it's a power.
I totally agree with that, and I think that's a really important component of masculinity and gun violence. But it's also another important component that I think is you think of this fear of like getting the rights of guns taken away, and you wonder like why are people so afraid that they're going to get guns taken away? And there's an emotional connection between guns and people of America for whatever reason. It's just so ingrained in our culture, especially if you look at males and like like in the Midwest, like I guess I am generalizing a little bit, but just like hunting with your dad or something like that. Like there's an emotional connection there. It's a hobby. It's something that people think back fondly of. It's like it's something that like a lot of memories are tied into. And it's something that I'm not familiar with because I've never experienced that, but I certainly can understand like having a tradition when you're younger and like wanting to stay with it and keep a connection to your roots, and that's very much the roots of certain people. So I think that's another reason why it's such an emotional issue.
Well, that's
Yeah, it was just something I thought about when she was saying that. Like, I think part of it was in the Columbine, the loss of Columbine, when there was a woman that they were talking to that was part of like the mission, that she said, well, as a woman, I thought I needed to learn defense, and it was like, and it made sense in our culture, that idea. I mean, great, okay, but that idea that you need like a gun as defense as a woman because you feel somehow weaker, physically, like that you would need a gun to protect yourself from other just men. Like, there was that type of thing too. Is like not so much masculinity as like just there is a gender thing that it was like you need a gun to protect yourself in that.
It's a balance. So we're going to take just 1 minute and think on just everyone go around and say one thing that you heard today that you had never thought about and what you're going to take with you. So just take 1 minute to think and we'll go around. Who'd like to start?
What Paul was saying about the NRA possibly being the one who's kind of perpetuating this fear of getting things taken away with something, an argument I've never heard, and it was really interesting. I really appreciated that idea. I liked it a lot. Thanks, Paul.
I actually don't think I ever really thought about masculinity when I was, but I guess it's always, I guess maybe subconsciously I thought about it, and I think it's really interesting.
I think I have to agree with Jordan on Paul's point about the NRA pulling some weight as far as interfering with gun ownership.
I think Colin's argument about we've made addendums or have made slight alterations in the Constitution before, yet our society kind of neglects to remember those, and we think it's such a radical thing to maybe regulate the Second Amendment, but yeah, they completely took away the regulate or just the prohibition of everything on that, and the hate speech. I mean, that's a huge thing. KKK was completely free to say whatever the heck they wanted, and now there are regulations in regards to that. And I think that's something that I never really thought of because I always think of it as such a singular and isolated issue, but it's part of a really broad idea of the Constitution itself. So.
I think Dennis's point about Hobbes and the social contract is an interesting thought. Paul's already gotten credit for his.
I'm going to fall on this one too. For the NRA and the misinformation on both sides, because things are definitely overblown in the media. It's a whole different issue. But that was good to know.
I would say the masculinity comment because with Bowling for Columbine, for example, they went into American culture being a violent culture, and then they argued against that by saying, oh, Germany has a very violent culture. And while other countries and places do have violent culture, it is ingrained in not just like our experiences, our hobbies, but also in our language. And I think that's something also to discuss about. Like it started off with a bed, photo shoot. There are tons of words that we've been using this whole entire week by accident. You realize, oh, we can't say that. Like stuff like that. But it relates back to masculinity.
Yeah, I've been sort of synthesizing a couple different things that have been said about moderate gun users as well as the origins of gun culture. I think it was a very interesting point that you brought up about generalizing here. In the Midwest and perhaps the South, guns are a very old American institution, and it is often a thing that fathers and sons perhaps bond over. It's perhaps an heirloom that gets passed down. Like I know that my father still has shells that my grandfather brought back from World War II. I know that my friend who showed me that gun has that gun because it's his father's who passed away when he was a little kid. And I think in a lot of ways, people are so afraid to lose their guns because it has a lot of sentimental value, perhaps. That being said, like with what John and Paul brought up, they have family members who are moderate gun users. And I think if people are going to have guns as sentimental objects, as meaningful objects in their lives, they have to be motivated enough to get a background check, to go through some training as to how to have their gun and to lock it away. And I think, I've grown up in Massachusetts where there really isn't a lot of connection to gun culture, and I don't want there to be in Massachusetts, and I think that's the culture of Massachusetts. But in a state perhaps in the Midwest or the South, where you inherited your grandfather's gun, I think you have every right to have it, but you of course need to have some regulations on that type of thing.
And to a little bit of lesser religion on that, I think a lot of the states around Massachusetts, very much, New York, where I'm from, New York City is one thing, New York State is very different. My family lives in New York, so there are still that culture of gun, in the family. The one thing that I learned today a few times this week and at different events and personal homes, some people have brought up storing the guns, locking the guns, but I didn't know that in Japan it was regulation that you have to have the gun in one place, the ammo somewhere else, and I think that's interesting. I didn't know that was the case there, so that's definitely something I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say the masculinity topic, just because I never really thought about it that way. Like coming, obviously, like you think, oh, I'm a Republican, but like, it would never appeal to me. Like, and as a man, it never appealed to me. I never wanted to go ahead and like, why do I need this thing, whatever. And so I never thought of it that way. But when you think about it and like think about why certain acts are motivated by, and just it.
I think that's kind of quickly. I always think about issues politically and logically and philosophically and thinking about sociology, and I think it was weird for me to like think about it personally. Like in my mind, for that first minute of thinking like how do I have connection to guns was the weirdest minute of my life because my first thing was like, oh, I didn't grow up with guns, and I realized, okay, that's like family best friends with the shoe. Okay, I'm seeing more guns, and I never really noticed as a kid. And I thought of this tragedy that was in my hometown, small little New Hampshire town. Someone had, first it started with a knife, but like they had really, really tragic story about killing the mother of his kids and then killing himself in the mass. And it was an involved thing, and I didn't even cross my mind when I was thinking about it first minute. And it was like really strange for me to think of, because it was a big thing in our school, for both my school. So just thinking like the fact that it, how do I express this? That it doesn't come out. That it's weird that we talk about it and we don't like desensitization and our language, and it's like and how that rather than
Awesome. Okay, well. all, this was a great discussion. Just quickly, before we end, I'm just gonna go over one more time the confidentiality agreement. We will not share what others said in any way that can identify them. It is okay to talk about what we shared as a group or what others asked, but not okay to share with what others specifically say. Of course, we had made some comments for possible Twitter posts, so if you guys do want to go over that, you guys can. Other than that, thank you guys so much for participating and for sharing your thoughts, both personally and just being able to really respect each other and respect each other's opinions. It was really good.
So regarding the confidentiality, do you guys want to keep the original agreement? Do you want to allow that to go on Twitter? It's really up to you guys.
I didn't personally say anything, but I wouldn't share with others. So.
Are there any, yes.
Sorry, I would just rather have anything that I might have said.
Is there anybody else who would like to be not part of the record?
Something like that.
Is everybody else okay with?
If you guys don't want your names on there,
Yeah.
Well, I guess,
I mean, there'd be no.
I guess like I.
She's gonna tag.
I'm
But you can put things that I said, you just don't connect it.
I mean, I guess like, don't tag my
My boss wouldn't agree with what I just said, let me just put it.
If I were to write a synopsis article for the website, not including names, is that better than just tweet? I think that would be better than just tweets. Is that without using any names at all, just content that was discussed? And
just say it was some students were there.
all in favor?
All in favor? Aye.
It's okay to vote against it.
It's okay, like it's.
It's also good, I mean, for people to know that there are endless students talking about this on a level that we are. So I'm always for promotion, but obviously with the privatization of it, it's confidentiality. But I think it's important for us to.
Excellent.
Awesome. And I think you wanted to say
Yeah,
one last thing before we end?
So lots of great events have been going on this week from Name-Side Violence. This was definitely one of the best. Tomorrow, yeah, and definitely a huge round of applause to the two groups. Very great. Tomorrow, Kidding Around.